Welcome, everybody, to our May market update with Kingdom Focus Financial. Uh, I hope to take the next few minutes just to share some of our insights and our thoughts on the current market. I hope you've watched our past ones and that you find today kind of that next step forward, a look behind the scenes of what goes into some of our thought process and we're managing our portfolios. I'm with Chuck Etzweiler today. Chuck, it's good to see you, my friend.
Thank you. The same here, Michael. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this is our thoughts and our views, and it's not intended to be investment advice where you run out and apply this to your portfolio. However, this is one of the pieces that go into our thought process and the puzzle behind how we are building and putting our portfolios together and managing them for clients as we move forward. And hopefully this gives you some insight into that. Today, what we'd like to do is continue in on our theme. As most of you probably know, our theme for 2024 is the acronym FOUR, F-O-U-R. And coincidentally, there's four letters in the word FOUR. And last month, if you didn't see it, you can find it on our website. We talked a little bit about the first one, Fed, and how they're trying to navigate and manage interest rates and inflation and how important that is. But it's not the only piece. And today we're going to talk about another piece that goes into that, which is the second for oil. And Chuck, I know you've put together some thoughts related to that and how it intertwines in all of our lives, regardless of what your occupation is or what your status is, or actually where in the globe you live. Go ahead and share some of your thoughts with us today.
Certainly, Michael. Here's the first slide. Boy, this is fascinating to me, even when I look at it over time. Going back to 2018, this is something most Americans unfortunately don't realize, is that the United States began a 6-year period where we are the largest producer of crude oil products, specifically oil based on a per barrel a day. If you go look at the 2023 numbers, this extends into this year. We're at a run rate of about 14 million barrels per day, eclipsing Russia and Saudi Arabia. Now, I know all of the issues that come along with crude oil. Certainly, there's the climate issue. And people, however, I'd like you to take, if you would, a different tact of how you view this. Think about any product or good or service that's produced in a given country. If that country is the world's largest producer, normally and naturally you would want it to be successful. And number two, its success would drive the overall economy to a certain extent. So here we sit. Crude oil is still needed in many products, certainly in the creation of energy from various forms. So what we proposed in the beginning of the year, Michael, as it says on the next slide, is that the price of crude oil needed to remain in a healthier range, but on the higher end. Now, I know that's an anathema to many of our thinking. We equate the price of a gallon of gasoline, which normally directly follows crude oil, as a demarcation of our own personal health from a financial perspective. But let's go way back to the bottom left-hand part of the chart, Michael. That was the end of last year. Crude oil sat at $63 a barrel. That's the green line. It's also noted on the right vertical axis. We start at 63, we go up to 83. The left side is a remnant of the S&P 500, the stock market, which is in black. It goes from 4,600 all the way up to 5,250. Here's what happened at the end of last year, Michael. We saw crude oil dip to $63 a barrel. The stock market was at a bottom as well. But what did we see happening? We saw crude oil rising all the way up to where it is today in the mid-80 range, and the stock market has moved in lockstep with it. This is a statistician's dream. When you see a chart like this, you see what appears to be two independent variables, but moving directly in sync with one another. Through just statistical reference, we have determined that the green line, oil, is the independent variable. It moves on its own. The stock market moves in line with it. Now, here's what most people find difficult to believe, is that when we get energy prices at a stable higher level, because we're the world's largest producer, it dictates what the rest of the economy does. I want you all to think about this. Let's say the average driver in the US drives 12,000 miles in a given year. Let's say the average vehicle has a 20 mile per gallon associated with it. That means you purchase 600 gallons of gasoline per year. Let's say it's $4 a gallon, like it is out here in California, where I am. That's $2,400 annually spent on gasoline. Let's say crude oil goes down in price, gasoline falls, goes from 4 to 3. You now spend $1,800, $3 a gallon times 600. You've saved $600. But here's the issue. That would also align with it. Crude oil going down to the 60s, demand on the overall side of the equation would likely drop because it would signify the potential of a recession. We don't like recessions. Recessions harm stock prices. Typically, the market drops 20%. So contemplate this. You got $100,000 in stocks. They drop 20%. That net worth is now at 80,000, although you save $600 in gasoline. People need to change, I think, Michael, the way that they think about this, because it does have a tether to the broader economy, and actually healthier prices on the higher end are what dictate where stocks will go in a given year.
That's very interesting, Chuck. And I love the analogy that you put in there and how it impacts everybody, right? Because transportation and filling up our vehicles at this time of year, our lawnmowers and weed whackers is important. And often as we have to spend more, we think that's bad overall.
Yeah.
But what I hear you saying is we're in a healthy range, right? And so we might be spending
Yes.
more. Wages have gone up slightly, but it's a healthy spot that we're in overall.
It really is, Michael. And I like that word because when you're the world's largest producer, you would want that given part of the economy to be successful, in those higher prices in a range certainly denote a healthy economy. And that's where we are today. And that's why you've seen stock prices up for the year.
Perfect. So I can't help but then tie this back as we've said we would this year. I mean, it's an election year, right? And obviously an election year has its own unique history and trends, and we've been tracking that, but the overall market looks to be on a positive note generally for this year. History tells us that might be the case, but one of the questions I've heard a lot is, wow, what will the election mean, right? And while I think there's a lot tied to an election from a personal and moral and value standpoint, uh, this chart tells us a little different story when it comes to market performance, doesn't it?
It does, Michael. It's fascinating, isn't it? So, what does this chart show? The good people at Bespoke, an independent research firm, they went all the way back to 1896. Why 1896? That's when the Dow Jones was created, the first stock market index. And they went to the first president that served under that collective index. And of course, that was Theodore Roosevelt, 1901. Now, here's the interesting thing. We chose the day of inauguration. Why? That's when a president can affect policy. They have their pen, they have their phone, they can enact executive orders. And we set the date when they leave office, not when they were to lose the election or had to be removed due to the term limit. We asked the question, okay, what does the market do over the last 125 years? Well, it's 7.7%. Now, that's just the appreciation. You think of the 2.8% dividend yield on average, you get your 10.5. That's the total return. But look at what it is, Mike, on the bottom right side, excuse me, for the red tongue twister. Republicans 7.9, blue Democrats 7.7. Folks, these are rounding errors. The market doesn't care the party affiliation of the sitting president over the last 125 years. Now, yes, there's differences in how folks govern. Yes, there's differences in what party favors what industry. I'll give you an example. Historically, Republicans are known to be defense hawks, as we call it, meaning you buy military stocks when a president is a Republican Party, and the Democratic Party tends to, again, stereotypically, but favor healthcare initiative driven by the government, the spending thereof, healthcare stocks. There's a whole iteration of various sectors and industries that we follow, we use. That's of importance. But to say this, Michael, hey, I'm going to get out of the stock market in general, and I'm going to wait to see who's elected, we think that's just foolhardy. It's not based on a strict disciplinary ideology, but one based on emotion. We all know the toxic mix of emotions in investing. They should never the two intertwine.
Well said. And I think to wrap that up, I'll just comment on that. The world stays open regardless of who wins the
Yes.
election. And I think it's important to remember that and to make sure, and certainly we work through that as we're managing portfolios to stay focused on the long term. And while we think this year will end up positive overall, we know there's a lot of emotions attached to the election, but the world economy still continues on beyond just the US elections, even beyond that. So thank you for being here and for sharing your thoughts today. Thank all of you who have watched this, for attending and for participating in this. We hope you found this helpful. Tune in next month for the next description in our 4 acronym as we dive into that. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our office. We're happy to have a conversation with you. We hope you have a wonderful day.